All right, now for Rand's ethics, advocacy of an ethics of rational self-interest. We're now in a position to pick up the third part, right, of the operative phrase, the interest part. How do we define what our interests are, our core values, policies, right, and so forth, right, should be. And for Rand, this falls out of, right, her understandings rather in the more fundamental branches of philosophy, a certain metaphysical orientation toward the real world or the natural world, an epistemological orientation that puts the importance of reason, right, to human nature as being fundamental, a certain understanding of the self as an integrated being, a volitional capacity, and so forth. All of that factors into our understanding of this. Now, what we can certainly see is that rationality is going to be a core component in defining what our rational self-interest is. So, particularly when we turn to Rand's formal list of virtues, the number one virtue that she mentions is a more cognitive virtue, right? The virtue of rationality. And the reason for this is that human beings, if we look at them in terms of their existential situation, right? We're born into the natural world, and the way Rand puts it is that nothing is, so to speak, given to us. We have to produce, right, everything that we need, and everything that we have produced in the modern complex civilization is a product of our ability to be rational, right, to use our rational capacity to understand the world and to act on our best understanding of the nature of the world. So for Rand, the number one thing that each of us has to understand is in our self-interest is to be rational, right? We have a very powerful cognitive apparatus. We are the only ones who can make it use because we have volition. It's the thing that we will use then to guide our actions, right, in the world. That's the mind-body integration point. And to the extent that we do so successfully, we will live and flourish in the world and achieve our interests. So rationality is the number one trait here. I have a couple of quotations in Rand's own words to this effect. Quote, "Nothing is given to man on earth. Everything he needs has to be produced. And here man faces his basic alternative. He can survive in only one of two ways, by the independent work of his own mind or as a parasite fed by the minds of others. The creator originates, the parasite borrows. The creator's concern is the conquest of nature. The parasite's concern is the conquest of men." Quote, "Man has a single basic choice, to think or not, and that is the gauge of his virtue. Moral perfection is an unbreached rationality, not the degree of your intelligence, but the full and relentless use of your mind, not the extent of your knowledge, but the acceptance of reason as an absolute." Unquote. All right, now unpacking this concept of rationality and applying it more to understanding our interests, the closely related point is the point of independence, right? And this is another key virtue, right, of Rand's, right? Sometimes it's listed, right, as part of a set of 7 virtues, but I think the best way to understand it is that independence is an application, right, of the broader concept of the virtue of rationality. So human beings, for example, each individual, right, human being has his or her own life. Each individual human being has his or her own cognitive capacities, and each individual is in control, right, of his or her life and cognitive capacities. And so if the most important thing that we need to do, right, is use our minds to understand the world, to guide our actions, it's important that we each commit to doing this independently. Right? I need to do my thinking for myself. You need to do your thinking for you, right? Just as Rand puts it, I can't digest your food for you. I can't digest your thoughts for you. And you can't do the same thing for me. Quote, "The vilest form of self-abasement and self-destruction is the subordination of your mind to the mind of another, the acceptance of an authority over your brain, the acceptance of his assertions as facts, his say-so as truth, his edicts as middleman between your consciousness and your existence." Unquote. So there's certainly a cognitive component here. Each of us needs to think for ourselves, to make the best effort we can to understand things on our own terms. Of course, we can learn an enormous amount from other people who are experts, who have different bodies of knowledge. Sharing knowledge, right, is very important, but not just trusting another person because they said so, not trying to piggyback or be parasitical on other people's thinkings, not just going along with the herd because everybody else seems to be doing so. Independently forming one's own cognitive judgments is important here. And then there's also an existential point here, and that ties into the point of integrity. Right? It's not simply enough to understand the world rationally, to think for ourselves. As human beings, we need to commit to acting on the basis of our knowledge. We are mind-body integrates. The whole point of coming to a theoretical and abstract understanding of various parts of the world is to be able to use that in guiding our lives. And that means that what we need to do is have a policy of commitment to integrity. That is to say, if we think that something is true, if we think that something is good, if we think that something is important, then acting on the basis of that. It may be affirming verbally the truth of something, or actually taking steps to achieve the good thing, and so forth. And it goes negatively as well. If we think that something is false, right, or destructive, right, or unimportant, then not letting that take up mental space, right, so to speak, or not acting in a way that is going to lead to self-destruction, right, and so forth. Another related point about being in our self-interest is an issue that Rand calls productiveness. Right, hers certainly is a social system that places a great admiration, right, for people who are highly productive, right, the industrial geniuses, the great philosophers and artists, right, and so forth, who have created values that add to the richness of our lives here. But this also is an individual responsibility. Certainly by the time we are adults, we leave our parents' home, we need to be self-supporting. That means we need to make a certain commitment to, right, productiveness. And productiveness, right, is a commitment to using our best understanding, right, of the world, having formulated our own best understanding, deciding what's valuable to us, and then acting with integrity in order to produce those values. So this might mean getting a job, right, starting a business, right, going off to college or university to improve yourself, to make yourself a person who can be more productive doing things that we want to do. But this is, to our self-interest, right, something that is a deep ethical truth in Rand's system. The contrast concept here would be people who strive bluntly to be parasitical, right, by the time that they're adult. They don't want to themselves self-responsibly produce what's necessary to sustain their own lives. Instead, they want other people to accept that responsibility, and then they're going to try to con them or cheat them or defraud them in some way out of their productiveness. All right, one more point. I won't go through the list of all 7 here, but one that ties in nicely to the social points that we want to make fairly quickly is a point about justice. Right? For Rand, justice is an intensely self-interested virtue. Right? For her, there's great value to be gained from social living. Other people know things that we don't know, so we can learn from them. Other people have produced things that we can trade with them for that will improve our lives and so forth. Other people are a source of pleasures in all sorts of ways, in our friendships, in our romantic interests, when we have children, right, and so forth. But for those social relationships to be valuable to us, to be part of a happy and fulfilled life, one of the policies that we need to commit to is a policy of justice, and that is to treat oneself and treat other people according to their merits. And so to one's self-interest, part of rationality then is judging, right, other people. So if we think, for example, say in a business transaction, suppose we do have 2 people who have been independently productive, right? I've grown some food, say I've grown some wheat, you've raised some chickens. We each of us then see an opportunity to trade with each other, and we make judgments independently about what the appropriate transaction amount would be. And so we walk away from the transaction, right, both satisfied with the deal, and we both honor, right, the terms of the deal, right? I treat you justly according to your productive effort. You've treated me justly according to my productive effort. Another example of justice would be, say, in an educational context. Certainly one of the great values we have is that we can all learn from each other. And in formal education, there's a whole lot of evaluation that goes on. Part of the justice that professors will do with respect to their students is evaluating the students' work according to its merits, and the students should be happy with just grades rather that they receive, neither wanting a higher grade than they've actually deserved, nor a lower grade than they've actually deserved, and the same thing holds for the professor in assigning it. All right, now the point of all of these, and there are two other virtues that we can list here. One is honesty and pride. And those round out Rand's kind of canonical list of 7 virtues here. Honesty is kind of a cognitive virtue. If facts are facts, and we do have a primacy of existence orientation, and we're trying to be rational and objective, right, and so forth. And it's important for us always to be attentive to the facts of reality as they really are, whether we're comfortable, right, with them or not. Pride is for her the virtue of seeing yourself as important, right, that all of this effort that one is going through, taking responsibility for your own life, judging the world as it is, making the commitments to act, to be productive, to deal with other people, right, justly and so forth. Taking pride in yourself as a person who has made all of these commitments, and then when you have achieved something significant, taking pride in yourself as the person who has done so. These also are virtues. So when we're talking about Rand's advocacy of rational self-interest, a person who makes these virtue commitments is the kind of person who is acting in his or her self-interest. And then by contrast, people who are fundamentally dependent, right, as adults, or people who are hypocrites, right, or people who are committed not to being productive, right, and so forth, are not acting in their self-interest. Instead, they're being deeply destructive, right, of their own self-interest. So what we have in Rand's theory of self-interest is a theory that is very optimistic, right, about human potential, and it's also socially a win-win understanding of self-interest, right? Sometimes this is put in her provocative formulation to say that among human beings, right, particularly in contrast to more pessimistic understandings of human nature, there are no conflicts of interest, right, between people who are rationally self-interested, right? It's to my self-interest that you be as rational, as independent, as being a person of as much integrity and productive, right, as possible, right? Your doing so is not in conflict with my doing so. Instead, your doing so is more likely than to lead you to be the kind of person with whom I can trade, with whom I can be friends, right, and so forth. And my being a rational, productive person and so forth, of great integrity, honesty, right, and so forth, means that I'm more likely than to be the kind of person with whom you can have productive trading relations and be friends, right, and so forth.